Surprise. So you probably weren't expecting this talk. Neither was I, but we're going to do our best. How much time do I have, by the way? Is this timer accurate?
You have until 4.
I don't know what that means in terms of this clock.
So, 55 minutes.
All right.
But perhaps I'd suggest you leave a little bit of time for Q&A.
Right. Okay, right on. So, I had told Dylan that I'd be happy to come to this conference, and I joked with him that in case the speaker doesn't show up, I have one in my bag. This is the one in my bag. Okay. So if you haven't met me before, either coincidentally or online, this is kind of a word cloud of my most popular things I tweet about. So things I find very important, including tonight's karaoke. I hope there will be people who join me. But I am the founder and CEO of Luta Security. We do work with governments, large organizations, in helping them prepare for vulnerability disclosure processes and sometimes bug bounties. But that's typically not our main focus. We really focus on getting people ready in terms of how are they going to decide which bugs are the most important, how are they going to eliminate as much low-hanging fruit themselves as possible, and how are they going to, if they do choose to do a bounty, avoid common pitfalls, perverse incentives, and all kinds of bad things that can happen to you. So, how did we get here? This is on that side with all the military folks. That's probably my favorite picture of myself at work. It's how I explain to my family what I do for a living. I don't know if you can see me in that one. Yeah. Anyway, the one on the right was me testifying before U.S. Congress last year on the Uber data breach. Does anybody remember? 57 million records were downloaded, and then they got paid an extortion fee through their bug bounty platform. And I testified as an expert on bug bounties, on what they are not, and on the marketplace that we are creating by creating more and more of these incentives. So how did we get here in general? I've been hacking since I was a teenager in the late 80s. Yep, do that math in your heads. Okay, we're here together now. This is what I call my midlife crisis here. So just enjoy this. When I started hacking in the late 80s, early 90s, there were very few new anti-hacking laws. We got to grow up in a period where we could experiment and not get into very much trouble. The same is not true today, but what has become true is that over the last 20 years, where I've been professionally in the security industry, we've created a huge amount of marketing. Yeah, we've created a lot of marketing, a lot of solutions, and a multi-billion-dollar security industry. And yet, why does this stuff keep happening, right? We still cannot seem to nail the basics. A lot of the worms that we see go out, the patches were already available. So when it comes to vulnerability disclosure, vulnerability management, everybody has the same vulnerability management problem, which is they have to apply the patches for the bugs that are well known, that are already out there, that people have exploits for. And then there are a few people, a few organizations that actually write code and have to create those patches. But everybody is in that first boat of we have to apply the patches for the technology that we've deployed. And if we don't do that in a timely manner, there we are, right? So silver bullets are often sold in the security industry as if you do X, then we'll protect you from breaches. I have not noticed any werewolves out in the world that we live in that would be susceptible to these silver bullets. So what does it really break down to? When I think about how these terms are used so interchangeably these days, terms like bug bounties, vulnerability disclosure, and pen testing, I have to take a pause and take everybody a step back and just get back to the basic definition. So one of the things you might have noticed on my bio slide is that I was the co-author and co-editor of the ISO standards on vulnerability disclosure and vulnerability handling processes. That's ISO 29147, ISO 30111. And really, all that is the process of receiving vulnerability reports, doing something with it, such as creating resolution, and then putting something out in terms of maybe a patch or an advisory or both. Sometimes it's taking in a vulnerability report, doing something with it, maybe on your actual cloud infrastructure, and not issuing any kind of alert because you took care of it on your end. It's all of those things, and that describes that process. Bug bounties have become synonymous with vulnerability disclosure. This makes no sense considering bug bounties are simply the cash reward that you may or may not offer to someone who reports something to you. And bug bounties are being conflated with penetration tests. You'll actually hear people call them crowdsourced penetration testing. Now, that sounds like a harmless enough equivocation of the two terms, but what are you really paying for when you get a good pen test? And I caveat that with good because there's a lot of variety in pen testing. But ideally, you're seeking an organization who has vetted technical security resources that are under NDA, not just with that organization, but then by signing a contract with you, are under NDA with you. What does that NDA do? Well, it makes it so that you can fix the bugs in a pen test at your own timeline, right? And you don't have to deal with the norms of vulnerability disclosure, which have typical deadlines and, expectations from a finder that you will fix things in a reasonable time frame. But the other thing you can do with penetration testing companies is that they already vet each vulnerability. You're paying for only real bugs in a pen test. Now, what's strange is when the marketing of bug bounties say pay only for the real bugs, well, they miss the fact that there's a whole lot of noise associated with bug bounty programs. And so they seek to manage it for you, right? This seems all fine. You can manage it, they can deal with the signal to noise for you, and you get allegedly thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of eyeballs on your code, continuously scanning. Not exactly the case, but let's just pretend for a minute that it's just that easy. And, if you want to start a vuln disclosure program or maybe a small bug bounty program, you just open up the front door, see what happens. So most people are expecting something like this. It's like mostly, friendly researchers, some white hats, a couple of gray hats maybe, and it might be a little bit of a flood, but it's manageable. When in actuality, it looks a lot more like this. And you kind of have no idea exactly who is knocking on that front door. And often your incident response team has to pay the price and do the investigation, right? So how do you distinguish friend from foe when all probing activity looks about the same? Especially when it comes to data privacy. Now remember, pen testing, they're under contract, under NDA. They are acting as an arm of your organization. What that means is that even if they uncover the entirety of your databases and all of your customer data, it's not considered a data breach. Why? Because they were under contract, authorized, acting as an extension of your organization. Bug bounties and vuln disclosure programs do not operate that way. Now, you might have heard the term safe harbor kicked around for vuln disclosure programs and bug bounty programs, and it's one of the worst misnomers that I've heard applied in this space in a few years. The reason is that no one can actually grant diplomatic immunity to hackers. Funny. Not even the Department of Defense in the United States. So when I worked on their vulnerability disclosure policy, there's legal disclaimer there that says, if you follow these rules, we won't take legal action against you. But it also goes on to say that if a third party brings legal action against you, we'll kind of stick up for you and say that you were following these things. But if you notice, it says that a third party could still bring legal action. Remember the Uber data breach, 57 million records. They signed an NDA. They presumably deleted all the data in exchange for their $100,000. But what about all the victims? How is that data stored? How is it transmitted? All kinds of data breach laws could have still been broken, and those hackers are still liable. So using the term safe harbor, I would definitely stay away from that because it's a misnomer for you and for the researchers who might come forward to you. And let's see. What about automation? How many of you heard of the DARPA Cyber Grand Challenge, right? Where it was all AI. And the teams basically created these AI systems to hunt for bugs and to also dynamically patch bugs. Well, what's going to happen if you can't handle the bugs you already know about from human sources when AI and other enhanced vulnerability and exploitation technology becomes more commonplace? It's like going to eat at a buffet when you have no digestive system. Good luck with that. Okay, so this story, we already know the outcome of this story. This person was found not guilty by reason of insanity. But what happened was this person who had participated in some CTFs, been a security researcher, went a little off his rocker and stole an armored vehicle from a military base where he was stationed. And luckily, nobody was hurt. He was tased on his way out. Let's see what happened. Do we have sound? That's okay. It sounds like a siren. In the US, it sounds different than here. So just imagine your local siren sounds. And also people swearing, because there's also swearing in the background. But this chase started in daylight. You can see this thing doesn't move very fast. You can also see all of the incident responders. Okay, this is the part where it had the people swearing in it. So just imagine your favorite swears, what you would swear if you saw this driving down the street, very slowly going by, right? So people were lucky, one, that thing didn't have any weapons. It was an armored personnel carrier. It was basically a tank without the guns. This went on for a couple of hours. It ended peacefully in the middle of downtown Richmond in Virginia. Okay, so they tased him, but this is what he said. He said he had authorization, and he was just running a test. Now, clearly, he had problems, and luckily, he's going to get the help he needs because, sometimes the justice system works out, and he was found not guilty by reason of insanity. But how many hackers can be going forth using the authorizations that you've put in the scope of your vuln disclosure or bounty programs, causing major disruption to your organization, using up tons of your incident response resources, chasing after what inevitably ended up being harmless. Weird, but harmless, So, all right, back to the bug bounty platforms. They're supposed to manage all this for you, right? Manage that flood, give you only validated bugs, but there's a fundamental assumption here that triage labor is magical, unending, and will always want to work for you. Not so. So when I worked at Microsoft for 7 years, I feel like I should have 7 little Windows tattoos on my face, for all the years, hard time I did on the inside. But Microsoft, even to this day, receives over 150,000 to 200,000 non-spam email messages a year to secure at Microsoft. Pretty sure no other vendor or government comes even close to that number at the top of the funnel. So a human being does the initial triage for each of these. No spam filter, manually sorts the spam from the real messages, and then performs further triage. And when I joined Microsoft in 2007, Popular Science made a list of the top 10 worst jobs in science. And they said that Microsoft security grunt, as in the people who were on the other end of secure at Microsoft, had among the worst jobs in science somewhere between elephant vasectomist and whale feces researcher. It was right there in the middle. This was accurate, and we made t-shirts. So the fact of the matter was, you could not keep triage personnel, and these were full-time, 6-figure paid Microsoft security program managers. You could not keep them in their jobs for the mandatory 12 months that it would take for them to be allowed to apply for a different job inside of Microsoft. That's how painful this job is. So, back to the outsourcing. Who is looking at your bugs? It's not a bunch of full-time engineers getting 6-figure salaries at these startups. No. It's mostly contractors, mostly bug hunters. Oh, nothing possibly could go wrong with that. All right, so let's pretend everything's going great. And there is such a thing as too much chocolate, right? You could be getting the purest, cleanest feed of only validated bugs, and yet you're still overwhelmed. Why? Because you didn't do the due diligence that this type of program requires for you to not hurt yourself. I do an entire talk about a vulnerability coordination maturity model. It's not just engineering that you have to think about in terms of your readiness to deal with vulnerabilities. Communication, analytics, your organizational priorities, and yes, incentives, but not all money. Some of the best incentives that we ever created at Microsoft were things that only Microsoft could do. So, for example, certain bugs that came in before the bug bounties were open, we didn't want to retroactively pay them because, boy, that would get expensive. But we wanted to say thank you to some prolific, security researchers. So we'd reach out to them and ask, do you have an Xbox? And if they said no, we would ask them, do you have a favorite graphic? And what handle would you like skinned on your personal Xbox, and they went crazy. This cost us $15 internally to do. 15, right? Another one, a one-time cost to a graphic designer who was a vendor to Microsoft Xbox that created one-time use like download code. So we only had to pay this graphic designer once to create a black hat, a blue hat, a black t-shirt that said hacker, and, a couple of other clothing items that we would hand out one-time download codes to researchers who did us a solid. People went insane. And I believe they're still handing these out, so it was one-time $3,000 spend. Certain things that only you can do. Ooh. No. Yes. Oh, that's a laser. That's the right one. Okay. So, not all bugs are created equal. This comes from a different presentation based on some work that I had done with MIT Sloan School and Harvard Kennedy School in modeling the vulnerability economy and exploit market. If you think that all bugs are the same level of sophistication to find or to fix or have the same value across all markets, well, then I've got a cross-site scripting bug to sell you for a hell of a lot of money. So a lot of the work that I do with organizations is pointing out that there is such a thing as low-hanging fruit with known classes of vulnerabilities with well-understood cheap or free tools that all you need to do is run them and you will find these bugs yourself. Whereas the majority of bug bounty programs are still paying out for cross-site scripting. No, that's really the one. Okay. So a lot of organizations think they're just going to set up a bug bounty program, set up a vulnerability disclosure program, ask for certain things, ask for certain types of bugs, and really all they get are bugs that are very, very uninteresting to them, right? It's not the bugs you're looking for. If we think about it, a lot of the breaches that have made the headlines are due to basic misconfigurations, basic security errors, creating things that have improper or no authentication in front of them. These are not groundbreaking new classes of vulnerabilities that you should be spending tons of money to fix. Even if you did hire pen testers as opposed to using bug bounty crowdsourcing, you still can't start there as your first step to true risk management, right? I can't believe I've been professionally in this industry for 20 years and I'm still saying this, but it's true. Yeah, and I call that bug bounty Botox if you missed it. So let's go through some myths of this marketplace and some motivations. We hear a lot that bug bounties are the logical end goal of all vulnerability disclosure programs, that if you're mature, that you have reached the pinnacle if you're doing a bug bounty. A lot of organizations are using that as shorthand for maturity, when in fact they've missed all the low-hanging fruit themselves and they're looking real busy and paying out a lot of money. But actually, it's for stuff that I have literally taught Hollywood screenwriters how to find in less than an hour. Okay, if that's the class of vulnerability you're paying for, definitely bug bounties are not the logical conclusion and indicate maturity. There's a myth that hackers will only look for bugs in exchange for cash. Not only is that provably not true, because Microsoft, until 2013, when I offered their first bug bounties, did not offer cash and was still getting over 150,000 or 200,000 non-spam email messages a year for free. But I have a different story about that in a minute. And the third myth is that you have to outbid the offense or the black market. It's not really a black market if it's not illegal. And how many of you think the offense market is evil and immoral? Well, okay. All right. A little bit. All right. Well, I was expecting everyone to just, kind of go along with offense. That sounds bad. But really what the offense market describes are bugs that are bought not for fixing, but for using for exploitation. Now, that is not inherently evil. If you think about it, organizations like governments who use it to target terrorists, use it to target child predators, those are all uses that we can all agree with. They are legally sanctioned by a judge, etc. I much prefer that use of exploits with governments than governments mandating that software backdoors and crypto backdoors be built into common applications. So anyway, all right, that's the laser again. All right. So one of the things in terms of this myth that hackers will only do it for money. This was a great exchange that happened on Twitter. There was a hacker, security researcher, who got a 6-figure payday, $119,000 from one program. When we broke it down and I said, look, even the Google Project Zero guys aren't making $29,000 an hour and they're finding very, very unique bugs. I browsed this list of bugs and they're not exciting new classes of bugs. They were imminently discoverable. Yes, you would need some skill to discover them. So it's not skillless that I'm talking about, but it was any pen tester could find them if they're a decent pen tester. So then someone, came in and said, oh, well, why would he ever accept a position inside of an organization when he could make, $119,000 in 4 hours? He did 4 hours of work to find those. And actually, he replied back. He himself, he said, I was trying to join their team. It fell through the cracks through, paperwork and an acquisition happened. But I've been wanting to join their team forever. He left his full-time job to be a bug bounty hunter, but he doesn't want to do that, even though it's super lucrative. And then this other person said, well, why is that? And what it came down to, in terms of motivation, was he wanted stability for his daughter. So even though he could bank, a bunch of cash, tons of cash, in doing bug bounty hunting, the instability was something that he didn't really want to live with, especially when it came to dealing with his daughter and supporting his daughter. So completely different from what a lot of organizations think when they think bug bounty hunter. We have seen so many bug bounty hunters turn down bug bounties because they wanted to see the issue resolved and fixed. That's another huge motivation for security researchers, right? When I was a professional pen tester, my specialty was robbing banks. This was like the early 2000s. And frankly, bank security was non-existent at that point, online banking. And there were ways that I knew how to mint money such that I wasn't stealing from a person and I wasn't stealing from the bank. Now, I still drive a used car. So obviously, money isn't the only thing that motivates all of us who are capable of finding bugs. So this is another excerpt from that system dynamics research that I had done with MIT Sloan School, Harvard Kennedy School. There is more to this ecosystem than money. When I look at the claims from bug bounty companies that promise continuous coverage, let's just break it down by the numbers. So part of what we did in that study was we did a labor market study of the bug bounty hunters at the time, and we took data from Facebook and from HackerOne. And we basically found that most of the people registered on these platforms, or even reporting directly to Facebook, it was a lot of noise versus signal. So I think HackerOne got upset that those numbers were recirculating and then published their own. This is from January. Doesn't look so good. Over 300,000 people registered. Only 1 in 10 has ever reported a bug on that platform. Out of those, 1,000 have made $5,000, and that's lifetime. It's not a lot, right? So who's making all this money? Well, 100 hackers have made over 100,000. That's about pen tester salary. It's in that range. And only 2 of them at the time, I think it might be up to 3 or 4 now, but only 2 of them had made $1 million in the entirety of their time on the platform. Now, one of them who had made $1 million was a 19-year-old Argentinian hacker who had just started doing bug bounties about 3 years ago. So in other words, didn't play Fortnite, did bug bounties. That was what he was doing. And if you actually look at his breakdown of the severity of his cases and the number of his cases, it took him over 1,600 valid vulnerability reports, with only 128 of them rated as critical. Is that $1 million worth of value from that bug hunter? Probably not. But the whole thing is that it's based on this predicated idea that there's an endless supply of high quality, motivated eyeballs who are going to look at your stuff all the time. And it's just not the case. These 100 individuals are pretty much bouncing around between the major bug bounty platforms. So even getting their eyeballs to look at your stuff is a challenge. And guess what the bug bounty companies do? They say, raise the bug bounty. How long is this going to last? Well, the truth is, bug bounties cannot replace traditional penetration testing, nor do they indicate on their own that your organization is mature. All human beings, which includes hackers, because we're not machines yet, have a mixed matrix of motivations. And frankly, finding bugs is not a forever game. Not even for, those of us who want to stay active doing hacking. When we did the labor market study, we looked at some publicly available data for critical level vulnerabilities submitted to Microsoft, because that was publicly verifiable as well, like with the bulletins and the names and all that stuff. It's about 7 years that people are participating at peak game when it comes to being able to find vulnerabilities and reliably exploit them in the latest versions of top software. So this is software that's had a ton of investment in security. So we're talking Google Chrome, we're talking Apple iOS, we're talking the latest version of Windows. And way back when Windows had a phone, that too, right? So it's a 7-year peak activity window for most security researchers at that level. And then finally, the last truth here is that the defense market can only go so high before it creates perverse incentives. What are perverse incentives? And what are some ways to avoid them? So one of my favorite cartoons is from 1995, and it was a Dilbert cartoon, which will come up a little bit later. But our friends at Apple recently decided that $1 million was a good defensive amount for a bounty. So they were saying, hey, we're doing it because it's harder now to break into our operating system, and what we're looking for is so very rare that we want to be able to scare this out of the woodwork, and we want to be able to, quote unquote, compete with the black market, compete with the offense market. Now, offense market is nation states and organized crime. What on earth makes anyone think that $1 million from Apple won't just drive up offense market prices, right? They were going up on their own without the intervention of the defense market. So there's no competition that's actually going to happen. It's just going to drive up offense market prices. Now, why is this a problem? Well, offense market won't feel it, and they won't feel it in a very particular way that the defense market will. The offense market was already outsourcing finding these vulnerabilities at this top level. They do not have the mission that the defense market has of trying to prevent these bugs in the first place. How do you continue to supply your internal engineering defensive labor market if it's cool to just stay out and not go work for Apple and make $1 million? Right? The risk of collusion dramatically increases at these prices. And if we think about it, when I offered Microsoft's first bug bounties in 2013, there were 3 of them, and one of them was $100,000, and at the time, it was the highest ongoing vendor-supplied bug bounty. Ongoing, meaning it wasn't a once-a-year contest, because we didn't want people to hold on to the bugs. And some people, when I started speaking out against this $1 million bounty, were saying, well, but didn't you offer the highest bounty? I said, yes, but it was matched to the defensive prices at the time. The Pwn-to-Own contest top price was $100,000. So we weren't introducing a new price point to the market. What we were doing was we were offering it 365 days a year, and for something that we wanted. So, yeah, Dilbert figured this out in 1995, right? The potential for collusion increases. And if you look at the United States healthcare system, it really takes one medical emergency to increase your chances of needing a lot of money really fast. So let's talk about the Microsoft bug bounties for a second. So what you're looking at here, this is the actual graph that was used to convince the head of IE to pay for his own bugs. This is after Microsoft in 2008 had sworn they would never pay for vulnerabilities because they were receiving so many bugs already for free. But what we did was I looked at the data. The white line is actually how many bugs we received during the IE10 public beta period. Not that many. And then the white spike was how many bug reports were received immediately after the beta period was over. Kind of the worst time ever for Microsoft to hear about a bug, right? And these were all these friendly hackers who were willing to turn these bugs over for free. Why were they finding them clearly during beta and holding on to them? What perverse incentive had we created for them unwittingly? Well, the only thing we were offering them was their chance for their name in 12-point Arial font in a bulletin. If the bug only affected the beta version and no other versions, we had created an incentive to cause them to hold on to it until after it was out of beta, because that was the only chance for them to get their name in a bulletin. Oops. So I told IE that we could move the spike to the beginning of the beta period if we offered a small amount of compensation, but really it was recognition. And so we offered the IE11 beta bug bounty in the first 30 days of IE11. Guess what? We got 18 serious vulnerabilities in that first 30 days. So we were right. We did the traffic shaping exercise and we were right. Anyone want to guess how many or how much I spent for all of those 18 total? Guess. 100,000? All right. Anyone else? Lower, higher? How many think higher? Okay. How many think lower? 10,000. Okay. So somewhere in between. Yes. It was about $28,000 total. And why was that? Well, one, it was just a token of our appreciation. We had this webpage where we'd feature them. We had blog posts. We had media that we were doing around these folks who were helping us. And in reality, a lot of the people who I knew were capable of finding these bugs, there were very few individuals. We already knew who they were. A couple of them were on parental leave. I had to send onesies to babies to get them to work on this thing because it was a fixed time period. And somebody had given birth in their household. So yeah, there was a lot that we did to round up the right sets of eyes to prove this point that we could do something with bounties that nobody else had done. And that was take the eyeballs of the friendly people we already knew about, understand the market dynamics of who was buying our bugs for how much and when, and understand that the incentives were very much around behavioral economics. Absolutely not about price. So this $100,000 check, that's not my real signature, by the way. Stop it. Cut it out. That $100,000 check was written to James Forshaw, who at the time was working for Contacts. Now he works at Project Zero. But that $100,000, again, this was for something. It wasn't just an exploit. Nothing that was going to win at Pwn to Own could win this $100,000. Why? Because we were looking for an exploitation technique. Now, let's talk about the offense market. Does the offense market buy bugs at 6 figures or $1 million a pop for beta products? Probably not. Maybe for Apple products, because people line up, out the door and pre-order that stuff. But I have never seen a line for people waiting to install IE. It's not a thing. So understanding your products and understanding your user behavior, important in understanding your market dynamics. The other thing, the $100,000, right. So clearly the offense market will buy working exploits that can defeat the latest mitigations. But do they need new exploitation techniques? No, because the old exploitation techniques work just fine, right? Who needs the new techniques? It's the people building the operating system, because you need to plan out several generations ahead to fully incorporate the architectural changes it takes to fix exploitation techniques. So not only were we offering it year-round, don't make people wait until Pwn to Own, but we were offering it for something that was not just an exploit, but so suitably rare, it was a brand new exploitation technique. Okay, hack the Pentagon. I want you to pay attention to a few numbers. Okay, so we were hoping that a few hundred people would join. You had to pre-register, you had to give your actual name, your social security number. I remember a few friends freaking out on Twitter, being like, I am not giving the government my social security number. And I was like, the government gave you that number. They also know your name. And they were like, but they don't know I'm a hacker. I'm like, you're tweeting about it, you know? So that was cool. I sent some friends some tinfoil for that. But we got an overwhelming response, which led to the worst signal to noise you can imagine. Oh my God, look at that. It was terrible. Over 1,000 bug submissions and 138 were real and not duplicate, right? What does your duplicate rate tell you? Your duplicate rate tells you how many people could find that same vulnerability. How common and how low-hanging fruit and discoverable is it? It's funny. The bug bounty companies do not track that number for you. They remove duplicates, but they don't tell you which of your bugs were super discoverable, low-hanging fruit. Because that might actually get you to fix those or prevent those or something. Anyway. Also, don't start a bug bounty at midnight. Don't do that. So this was us after we had launched Hack the Army. Actually, I'll go back one. So see this, you can see a little binary around there. This was one of those non-monetary gifts that only you can give, specially designed challenge coin that went out to everybody who successfully participated in Hack the Pentagon and submitted at least a valid bug, even if it didn't get paid out because it wasn't the first submission. The binary around there said, I hacked the Pentagon. This was the Secretary of the Army at the time when we launched Hack the Army, and he said, can our binary say, I hacked the Army, beat Navy? It did. And actually, their football team did beat the Navy for the first time in 50 years, so I'm pretty sure it was the hackers. Just gonna say right there. But look at the numbers. First, the registration number, a lot smaller. That was deliberate. We capped the registration in order to handle what we knew was going to be a little bit of a signal to noise melee, right? Because the DoD wanted to start with bug bounties as opposed to starting with a vuln disclosure program. Why? Because bug bounties are sexy and money is sexy and they wanted some headlines. This sounds familiar. $1 million. Anyway, also starting it at noon was much nicer, right? So, how do we deal with this as a whole? I have been one of the biggest proponents of good bug bounty programs, well thought out, carefully planned, deliberately executed bug bounty programs, and yet I'm up here telling you that they're not all that. What is the proposed solution? Well, when I testified before Congress about the Uber data breach, one of the things I pointed out is that, frankly, the top 10 computer science programs in universities in the United States lacked any kind of requirement for security. So even the university-educated computer scientists out of top universities in the US were receiving zero security education. 3 of those top universities had no security electives whatsoever. So we're not cranking out code writers, we're cranking out bug writers. It's pretty bad. Also, the fact that bug bounty hunting is being celebrated by some of these companies at outpacing the median salaries in their countries, especially India, where a lot of the bug bounty hunters come from, because there's a lot of low-hanging fruit and a lot of like easy money to be made. India, it's something like 16 or 17 times, 40 times that in Argentina. That's because of that $1 million bug bounty hunter, by the way. That's that data point that drove that number up. But talk about perverse incentives. Where do we outsource a whole lot of code writing? To a lot of the countries with a lot of these bug bounty hunters. So, tiny fraction of talent, majority generate noise. So what can you do bug bounties for that works out well for you? Finding bugs you missed after you did your due diligence. And there are a lot of ways to discover whether or not you did your due diligence, right? Known classes of bugs, the rate of duplicates, all kinds of stuff. Recruiting for talent that maybe you wouldn't have found. And focusing eyes that you know are capable of finding bugs in your stuff on the areas that you need more help with, or focusing them at a time that is mutually advantageous to you, to them, and to your users, like the beginning of a beta period. What are they bad for? Your first time ever receiving a bug. That causes a lot of bug indigestion, let me tell you. It's really bad for employee morale if you haven't thought through your recruiting and pipeline capabilities. When I was a young 20-something hacker working as an independent penetration tester, the only thing that got me to join my friends at Stake was because I respected my NDAs and I didn't have anyone to talk to about the cool bugs I was finding, bouncing ideas off of in terms of pen testing techniques, and really nobody to share knowledge with where we would enhance each other's knowledge. So I took a huge personal pay cut to join Stake back in 2003 when I had been independent and happily humming along since about 2000 as an independent pen tester. Why would young Katie have ever joined Microsoft and ever joined any mega corporation whatsoever if I had had better economic opportunities and freedom remaining an independent bug bounty hunter forever? So you'll never know who or what you may miss if you price your incentives for bug bounties way too high. And this is the problem that I worry about with my friends at Apple. I hope they find some of those $1 million exploits, but then what? What's the next generation going to look like for them? How will they attract new players and invest in them? And how will they retain the people that they have? There will be career limitations for folks inside of Apple. I mean, not everybody is going to end up taking Tim Cook's job, right? You know, especially not from the technical engineering side of the house. So what happens to those folks when they could just sit out the waiting period and then come back in and start making millions? And then finally, this is not good. Bug bounties are not good for data privacy unless you've really thought through how are you going to scope these issues? How are you going to handle intentional or accidental breaches of your terms? If you are vulnerable to heartbleed, technically that requires a small exfiltration of data in order to determine your vulnerability. If your terms say, thou shalt not exfiltrate data that doesn't belong to you under any circumstances, then guess what? You may have some hackers who will never come forward because they know that even testing for heartbleed is a technical violation of your terms. Or you'll have people coming forward and then you have a choice about what you do about it. So often I tell organizations they have to prepare for when people deliberately or accidentally breach their data protection terms. So what are you going to do? Go hack yourself. Seriously. No, get out of here and go hack yourself right now. But really what you need to do is understand, where are you actually missing personnel? Where are you missing processes? What tools could you be running yourself to prevent vulnerabilities in the first place? If you are one of those organizations that does write code, what kind of secure development lifecycle stuff are you actually doing? What are you learning from every single bug? Every bug is an opportunity, right? Beware of perverse incentives, and don't just automatically assume that hackers, that we all do it just for money. We absolutely don't. Yeah, bug bounty Botox, not a good look. You actually have to be pretty on the inside too, turns out, in terms of your processes. There's a ton of cultures that have this idea of balance between creation, maintenance, and destruction. And I think right now we are over-romanticizing destruction, right? Finding flaws, constantly finding, and not having enough people, personnel, knowledge passed down, practices passed down that help us nail the basics. I never thought that there would still be wormable bugs in 2019, and yet here we are. So there's a lot of references. I will make the slides available, so you don't have to photograph that. But I will leave you with one thought. In order to hack our labor market has to change. For the last 20 years in my professional career, I have looked at rooms that look a lot like this one, right? And how are we going to change it? Well, we need to borrow from other disciplines. This is a nurse who became interested in cybersecurity when her patients could be killed by remote attacks in embedded medical devices. She's now one of the best advocates for cybersecurity and building secure medical devices, making them updatable, helping institute vulnerability disclosure programs in those medical devices, borrowed from another discipline. This person had just won a CTF, and when she was pregnant with this little person, she was in a homeless shelter. So when we look across our socioeconomic backgrounds and what we normally see in rooms like this, We need to take a broader approach because we are not going to keep getting by with mostly male, mostly white bug hunters around the world. That is not actually going to solve our labor market crisis. This is one of the most obvious areas for us to expand. Now, I will say one thing about this. I've given you a ton of information in this talk. I would love for you guys to ask me questions about the stuff in this talk, not about diversity inclusion, even though I'm ending with it, because guess what? I don't do diversity inclusion for a living. Hire professionals who do. And the last thing I will say is that we're running a bug bounty buffet coming up in October. So Hack in the Box is doing a what's called driven to pwn competition. And it is a lot like pwn to own in that there are a selection of targets. But what's different about it is that vendors are invited and they can follow their own vendor disclosure rules. Hackers can choose. There's the driven to pwn set of rules, which are the 90 plus 90 plus 90 rules, which is basically you give the vendor 90 days to fix it. You do a courtesy pause of 90 days for everyone to deploy the patch. And then you do a courtesy pause and then you release everything open source. Why? Because we're trying to train up the next generation of people who can find and exploit these vulnerabilities, ideally, so that they come to work for organizations to prevent them. So, with that, I will take any questions. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much. Doesn't she deserve an awesome big round of applause? I think we're so lucky. This is really a great bonus surprise, and we're lucky to be able to hear you today speak on bounty programs, Katie. So thank you so much. Really appreciate you stepping in at the 11th hour and for your informative talk. So now we have about 5 minutes left for questions before we go for coffee break. We have two prizes to give away. One is for the most upvoted question and one is for your favorite question. Okay. So first I'll throw it open to the floor and then I'll go to Slido. So anyone, any questions from the floor for Katie? Yes, sir, at the back with the red shirt.
Hi. Do you
Hello.
prefer to open bug bounty program to the public or to private? If it's public, what's the issue that could be faced when open to public?
I believe that bug bounties should only be embarked upon with mature organizations who are already used to receiving vulnerability reports. I believe that private bug bounties are mostly used as a tool to get people onto bug bounty platforms, right? And it mimics this sense of safety that you have with a traditional pen test, but you typically will not get a lot of attention from the researchers, especially if you're offering sort of lower amounts of money in the private program than a lot of public programs will offer, right? And it's lower amounts of money for low-hanging fruit, and it's a lot of duplicates and everything like that. So they know that they'll probably put in the work but not get paid. So, answer to your first question is, private versus public in terms of bug bounty. I believe public is better because I believe that organizations should be mature enough to handle regular vulnerability reports. And what was your second question? Can you ask again? Sorry.
What's the issue or challenge that could be faced if open to publics?
Okay. Issues and challenges open to the public. Well, volume, right? Dealing with your major bottleneck labor force, which is not bug hunters, but triage. Finding trusted triage partners. If you don't have triage personnel yourself that you're willing to constantly train and maintain is going to be a challenge. But yeah, it's usually signal to noise. Now, if you've done your due diligence, you cut down on that signal to noise problem quite a bit because there aren't a lot of duplicates. There isn't a lot of spam. Okay, next question.
Okay, great. So we'll come to the questions on Slido. We have two questions which have the equal number of votes, the highest number of votes. So they're right behind you. Oh, there's three now. Oh, goodness. Okay, all of them with 6 votes, all of them anonymous, so you're not going to get your prize. Why don't you pick one, Katie?
Can't. Okay.
Oh, shall I read it out to you?
No, I can read it that way.
Okay.
It's okay. It's just that way I'm going to fall off the stage. I'm not very coordinated. Okay, so let me just see.
Maybe we can take two if you keep
No, not really, because I didn't have a bathroom break before taking
Okay,
this
so
talk.
let's just
no, we're
pick
gonna
your,
pick.
okay, I
just
tell
pick
you what,
one.
pick the second one because it's got 7 votes.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Is it now the top one?
Yes,
Between
that's right.
exploits and backdoors, both are inherently bad in the wrong hands. Why would the government having a private exploit be better than them implementing backdoors in common software? Implementing backdoors hurts everyone for a very, very long time. Having one exploit that may or may not get killed in the next version of software is a much smaller problem. And it doesn't inherently make that software insecure for everyone. Does that answer that question? I hope it did. No crypto backdoors. Anyway. Okay, one more quick question, and then everything will have to happen after the coffee/bathroom break.
Yes, sir. This gentleman here. And then, right here. And then, Katie, you get to pick which of who gets the prize.
Oh, okay. What? All right.
Hi. Yeah, so my question is, how is the bug bounty balanced on the other end of the rope with regards to raising the development team's competence? Like, a lot of companies spend a lot with regards to bug bounty programs, but what are they doing on the other end, like internally with their dev teams?
That is a great question, and that actually is dependent vendor to vendor. So not all vendors take those bugs as the learning opportunity that they really are. A lot of the advice that I give to vendors is when they say, oh, look at this bug. It came in through our bug bounty program. Thank goodness we paid that person $1,000. And I said, but it's, missing authentication. Why did you need to pay a stranger to tell you that? Right? So anyway, with that, I'm going to call it done.
Yes.
Unless somebody wants to film a very unfortunate accident on stage.
No.
We're done.
I think we're done. It's okay.
But I'm supposed to pick something?
Yes. So out of the 2 gentlemen who asked you questions, which one deserves the prize? Or both of them?
Oh,
do?
they both deserve prizes.
Okay, well done.
Come on.
You both get prizes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. A big round of applause for Katie.